Laura has given us some handouts, and I have attached those to the session description for Laura's presentation in the SCED platform. So if you go to SCED and you look at the full schedule and you click on Laura's presentation and scroll down underneath the description and her biography, you will see the attached files. So you can take a look at those handouts, print them out, whatever you need to do. So let me get started. I'd like to introduce you to Laura Louise Green. She is a psychotherapist and the founder of Healthy Pour, which is a consultancy that helps organizations address issues of well-being in the workplace. So Laura utilizes her knowledge and skills as a mental health practitioner to facilitate training, growth, and development at work to create safer and healthier environments. So Laura, please take it away. And thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Jamie, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with all of you um, talking about this topic. This is a topic that is not only my profession, but absolutely beyond near and dear to my heart. It's something that's very, very important to me. I've been working towards being able to responsibly present content like this to you today for many years. And I'm just very, very, very happy to be here. Any questions you have, like Claire said, please just pop them in the Q&A. I'm happy to answer them. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're talking about managing self-care when working in the food industry. Very important and sometimes tough topic. So again, my name is Laura Louise Green. This is my full bio here, but like Claire said, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a trained psychotherapist. I don't practice conventionally anymore because I started working in organizations. I spent 20 years or so within the hospitality, food and drinks industry. And while I was pursuing work as a psychotherapist, I also had this like parallel process happening of my career sort of taking off-ish in beverage in particular and hospitality. And I found myself engaging in and noticing some behaviors and trends and cultural bits that are um, rather precarious, I guess we could say, a little bit tough. And I wanted to know more about why we were doing that. And as a result, it sort of spiraled into this career expertise, subject matter expert stuff of the hospitality, food and drinks industry in particular, but also looking at what we call deskless jobs where people aren't in conventional workspaces at their cubicles and, they have their meetings and teams and blah, 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 blah. It turns out 80% of the global population's workforce works in a deskless job. And somehow it's also severely overlooked within the organizational psychology literature. So all that being said, I'm back in school now because I obviously hate money or something. I love learning to study organizational psychology in London at Birkbeck in the Birkbeck Business School, which is not what they're calling it now. So I have this blend of understanding organizational needs, organizational psychology, but also individual issues when it comes to mental health and well-being. And I'm able to approach these problems from an interdisciplinary standpoint, looking specifically at understanding what the workforce looks like within these deskless workspaces, also from a mental health standpoint, and then of course an organizational psychology and business standpoint. So my organization is called, excuse me, it's called Healthy Pour. And it came from my study of burnout in early days of doing this work. I was very interested in burnout, definitely still am. But I wanted to figure out how can we continue to do this work and continue to excel in this work without just totally bleeding ourselves dry. So Healthy Pour, it's helping you pour from a full cup. What we hope to achieve here is that we can facilitate transformation and growth in organizations and professional communities so their members emerge better off than when they started. We have this sort of mindset, and this isn't just limited to the cheese industry, to the food service industry, to the agricultural industry, these these industries that we are very, very tied to, especially within this space. But I would say it's a global issue when it comes to how we understand work, that we're supposed to give to our job and then our time away is to recuperate so that we can give to our job again. And this is especially tough when we're passionate about our job, when we care deeply about our work, when what we do absolutely delights us. And those are some things that we see a lot, definitely in cheese production, sales, development, any sort of like artistic craftsmanship endeavor. We can sometimes fall into those like passion taxes, but we get kind of stuck in giving ourselves to our work only to use our time away as recuperating. And what I want to see more of is, how do we go to work and leave energized? How do we go to work and our work and the community of practice and the organization that we're a part of is able to function in such a way that we leave better than we started, that we don't go home to our families at the end of the day and just give them the scraps of ourselves, that we're able to be present, that we're able to cope effectively, all of those different things, which really, I think, plays very well into what we are talking about today. Healthy Pours values are curiosity, integrity, security is a big one, the feeling of safety and all of that. And then compassion. And I want to lean into compassion really quick, because when we have these discussions about mental health and well-being, and to a degree there's going to be a bit of conversation here about organizational structure. And I also want to flag that when we have conversations about things like self-care and coping and stuff, sometimes those conversations can be just a little bit tender because we're reflecting on how we've behaved in the past or what we've done in the past, or sometimes I haven't taken great care of myself, or sometimes I've fallen into some behaviors that I'm not specifically proud of. I just want to flag those things and direct you to be as compassionate with yourself as possible, and also be compassionate with others as possible. We're all really like coming out of rather oppressive systems, like in general. For too many decades, too many hundreds of years, these working systems have been built around treating people as cogs in a machine. And we are moving into a workplace dynamic nowadays that's a little bit more emotional. Rather than the Industrial Revolution, we're looking at a more workplace emotional revolution, a very humanistic centered workplace. So we're seeing this really, really profound paradigm shift, where the workplace is being treated almost as a therapeutic space, a space for community, a space for growth, a space where you can contribute who you are and be part of something that's larger than yourself as a community member. So we are all both guilty and victims of a very long-standing system that hasn't necessarily been helpful for our mental health and well-being. And I just want to flag that we are compassionate to that as we learn these sort of new skills and these new steps in the next directions. Okay, so first, I want to know who you are. It's funny, I can't quite see who you are. Like in my vision, I'm just in a room with my dogs talking to a screen. So it would be helpful if you could just either hit the link that's in the chat, or scan that QR code if you have your phone nearby, and just let me know who you are. I would like to know, like, what's your role in the industry? I know you all come from a lot of different places. I see cheesemaker coming through. You're an owner. Some of you, I'm sure, work in hospitality stores, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, please tell me where you are, and that'll help me also really tailor this conversation to who's in the room. Very cool. Dairy farmer, nonprofit. Listen, oh, look at all these come through. This is wonderful. Ingredient supplier. So we're seeing a pretty strong diversity of folk who are in the room. Very cool. So we burnt out cheesemaker, bless you. Owner, farmer, cheesemaker. So I'm also seeing like people wearing a lot of hats, which can be a little bit tough too. Wonderful. Great. Thank you for that. Really, really helpful. Okay, wait, I'm just checking the chat really quick, make sure that I'm Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, thank you all for that. I hope this is also helpful for you all to see like the diversity of brains also and the diversity of roles that are in the room. Um, Perfect. All right, so let's get back to it. Um, so managing our well-being while working in food is hard. It is inevitably hard. It is hard for all hospitality, uh, off-premise, retail. Food is just an industry, and agriculture. Food is an industry that runs on very slim margins usually. It relies on a long traditions of knowledge, but also like intense physical and often emotional labor. It is an industry that is beautiful, creative, passionate professionals are in it. Those things, that's the passion is sort of like a double-edged sword too, that I want us to really, really embrace the duality of it. That on one hand, being passionate about our jobs is a wonderful thing because we feel like we're working towards something, we're able to self-actualize, we love what we do. It also makes us rather susceptible to working conditions that aren't ideal. Sometimes we put up with stuff that we normally wouldn't. When we have these sort of personal mission driven sense making initiatives that we are like deriving from a motivational standpoint, sometimes we're willing to put in more than we know for sure that we're going to get back. Um, so it makes it tough. And then of course, from a social standpoint, we don't always see that there are systems in place to support these careers and support these industries. They're often very invisible. I think about like when I walk through, let's say a Whole Foods and I walk through the cheese section, sometimes and the wine section at that, I imagine just the immense amount of knowledge that goes into not just the curation of those areas, but also like the manufacturing, all of the different supply processes that happened for that, the expertise, just the hundreds of thousands of years of expertise that goes into what goes on the shelf. And I think that those the understanding of that is often lost on the consumer, and it creates an invisibility of what we do and who we are and how much what we do really matters. That can take a real toll on our identities, our feelings of value, of worth. So we have these like multiple levels of feelings and support and needs that are sort of culminating into working in food is really hard. And I want to acknowledge that sometimes the the struggle that we are experiencing is unseen. It's not like we're all like Wall Street professionals like coming through with our fancy whatever. It's a very different kind of life, and it's a different um road to go down. I do want to assert with that, however, it doesn't mean, though, that someone who works in cheese or wine or retail or any of these things are somehow less deserving of care and less deserving of support and our well-being to be tended to. Like those are different things. Um, and I'll fight that until I'm blue in the face for sure. So let's talk about what exactly well-being is. What do we mean by well-being? I've seen some definitions in my career that well-being is about um happiness, which I hate. I'll be real, like I'm not a fan of that definition. It's like to the degree of happiness that people are. What I think about well-being, what I think a more appropriate definition from like an academic standpoint of understanding the functions and phenomenon of well-being is that people are able to move through this normal stresses of life in a way that they can continue to survive and thrive, that we can experience happiness, but we can also experience challenging emotions and challenging situations and move through them in a way that doesn't harm or traumatize us. That means that we need different areas of well-being in our life to be strong and structured so that it can support when we run into those challenging things. And that means emotional well-being, that means social well-being, financial well-being, um, physical well-being. All of these different pieces really blend into each other so that it creates this overall umbrella of well-being. When we look at workplace well-being overall, we often, how do I put this and not sound like a total jerk? Um, we will see organizations try to create well-being initiatives that result in people being able to work more efficiently or work stronger or be more productive and all of these things. And I really challenge that sort of mindset and paradigm when we think about well-being, and instead of looking at it in the context of how can we be better workers, how can the organization help to make us well in our holistic life, in everything that we do, as the roles we play as a parent, as a daughter, as a friend, not just as a cheesemaker or administrator or manager. So really identifying, I think well-being in addition to that is such a personal thing. So like a really great exercise that you might want to do for yourself. I don't know if you all journal or, whatever, but just really think about like, what does well-being look like for me? When do I feel my most capable? When do I feel my most valued? When do I feel my most like smart and electric and energized? And start to think about those things and what those circumstances look like, and what those circumstances also look like outside of the workplace and in the workplace. We'll talk more about, in a second, but we'll talk about protective factors in just a moment. But I want to hear from you, like, how would you rate your self-care practices? And it's the same link. I'm going to scooch it to the next one. There we go. So how would you rate your self-care at this point? And when we say self-care, I'm not talking about bubble baths. I'm not talking about, oh, right away, pour. Ooh, Lord have mercy. Okay, cool. I'm feeling hopeful. But we're not talking about like bubble baths. We're not talking about watching the new season of Love is Blind while drinking a glass of wine. We're not talking about like go getting a manicure or a pedicure or any of those sort of like things. Sometimes self-care is being accountable to yourself. Sometimes self-care is going to therapy. Sometimes it's going out when you don't want to be social. Sometimes it's staying in when you don't want to be social. It really, self-care isn't always the bubbly roses that the internet makes it out to be. So I'm looking here. So cool. We got a great. I like to see a great. And we have a lot of okay. We have a little poor. Okay. And also not so great. So we're kind of seeing a mix of people. That is very, very, very good to know. Thank you for, I'm watching it change in real time. It's very cool. Oh, the internet's amazing. Okay, wonderful. So let's talk about protective factors. Protective factors are the sort of like foundational pillars that we have accessible in our lives that make it so that we can withstand challenges and thrive when things are going well. So, something as a therapist that I will often ask, clients or even friends and family members is, what kind of protective factors do you have in place? What do you have um what do you have from like a preventative standpoint and from a foundational like uplifting standpoint that can help you move through the world in a way that you can honor yourself and care for yourself? I would compare it to like if you have a house and you live in Florida, Louisiana, like what do you call it? hurricane places, and you have like those shutters for your windows like ready to go, that like, okay, hurricane season's coming, we shut everything down. Those would be protective factors. Those would be things that we have sort of built into our lives, into our homes, so that we can literally weather the storm in a safe way. When we talk about protective factors, it's important to know that they come from all different kinds of areas of our lives. It's not just like a singular protective factor. And to understand this, we have to understand how complex our mental health is. Mental health is not something that comes and goes. It's with us always. It can change throughout the day. It can change throughout the decade, a lifetime. Sometimes we're in a good place, sometimes we're not. Like I'll even say today, I've had some pretty stressful moments today, and other times of the day have been really great. And probably later I'll be a little tired. And, sometime after I take my Lexapro, I'll probably be a little better. Like it really depends on a lot of different things and a lot of different influences. So the first one I want to highlight is social bits that influence our mental health. Social is like the larger social narratives that we run into. That's politics, that's yeah, narratives around oppressive structures or uplifting structures. That is like those sort of cultural bits that we run into that dictate behavior, cultural norms, racism, sexism, gender, like all sorts of stuff, all of that, all the big, seemingly deterministic stuff, those are social bits that are going to impact our mental health. And we all know that those can be especially hard on us because they're things that we don't always have immediate control over. And we might have control over some of those things on a very interpersonal level. We'll talk about interpersonal in a second, but overall, those things still have impact on us. I'll go back to the house narrative. Our social bits are like the weather. It's like when it rains. We can't really control when it rains, but it's still going to affect our house. It's still going to affect our yard, that kind of stuff. Interpersonal, those are our individual relationships. Those are our small groups. Those are the people that we work with, the people we interact with on the street. That's our family members. That those are the day in and day out conversations that we have. As you can see, like in the diagram, the social and interpersonal definitely have an overlapping, because our social relationships and the relationship that we have overall with the world is also impacting our interpersonal day-to-day interactions with each other. Some people will argue that the interpersonal is like the most influential factor when it comes to mental health, and that in a lot of ways might be true because they all kind of feed into that. But it's who we interact with and how we interact with them on a day-to-day basis is impacting our mental health as well, our identities and all of that. Biological is what's happening physically in our body, and that's anything from how much sleep we got last night to what we're feeding our bodies with. Like I ate a pizza, maybe I could have gone with a few more vegetables. That's going to impact how I feel. Our hormones are, do you remember being in puberty and how horrible that was? Hormones going up and down. Oh, Lordy. And mental health takes a toll. Like that regulation kind of goes out the window, right? Like, pregnancy, menopause, life stages. Are we feeling any sort of pain in our body? Do we have an injury that we're dealing with? All of those things are going to impact our mental health. Sometimes when we fall into conversations around mental health, we focus very much on this biological piece and think about like brain chemistry. And that's a part of it. That is a very influential part of it. Like I said, I take my Lexapro and I'm a little bit better, but there are so many other factors that are also influencing our mental health day in and day out. So it's not just solely that. Then we also have experiential. So that's the stuff that happens to us. So if we're in a car accident, or if we witness something that we don't want to see, or someone's especially kind to us, those are the things that there's obviously going to always be this overlap of social and interpersonal and maybe a bit of biological to that. But those are the things that just sort of like happen in the world to us. What did we see? Like the global pandemic is a great example of like experiential. That's something that happened to us. And then we saw social, interpersonal, biological, and individual factors play into that. And then the last one, and this is the one that I think is most important today in terms of what your takeaways can be, is individual. And these individual factors aren't anything having necessarily to do with your brain chemistry or your relationships. A little bit, like it plays into all of it, but it's what is your emotional intelligence like? How is your emotional regulation? How well are you coping with things? Are you adaptively coping or are you avoiding stuff? Those individual skills and sort of qualities that we have that can play a role in, like, if a car cuts me off, am I going to fly off the handle in a road rage, or am I going to be like, well, maybe that guy really has to go to the bathroom? Like, those are those individual pieces that dictate sort of how we are viewing and perceiving and internalizing the rest of it. Those individual factors of all of these things, that is the most control that we have. And that's going to be a lot of what the core of what we talk about today. So coming back to protective factors, and I want to talk a little bit too within the context of this about resilience. That's a weird line. I don't know why there's, oh, we're good. Never mind. About resilience. Resiliency is something that we're seeing in workplace well-being trends where we talk about how can we make the workforce more resilient? How can we make it so that we are able to withstand these stresses and stuff like that. Resiliency, though, is not just a individual protective factors. I'm going to go back a slide and revisit. Resiliency means that we have interpersonal support, we have biological support, we are protected from experiential danger, and we have social support as well in relation to these individual factors. So asking employees and asking people to be resilient and to build resilience without integrating support systems that are both organizational and cultural, it's kind of unfair, right? It's when we start to run into issues where people start to be burned out because they're doing so much to try to care for themselves. But from our organizational and social and cultural standpoint, those things aren't in place to support them. And when we look at systems of control and what we can absolutely control, we can say, like, okay, we are going to advocate for more support in the workplace. We're going to, create systems of feedback. So many mental health and well-being interventions in the workplace aren't mental health and well-being interventions at all. They're more structural. They're more around like culture development. They're more around communication systems, stuff like that. But that's not to discount that individual protective factors can be so important. Sometimes they're the difference between being well and unwell, between being in a place that we're able to continue on and move into a place of thriving or not, to advocate for ourselves or not. So I don't want to diminish the importance, the just volume of importance that it comes to with individual centered protective factors. But I think I would also be irresponsible to not mention that these organizational and cultural pieces play a massive role in it as well. So it's not so much about building resiliency just from an individual standpoint. It does require the entire social system. And I'll go back to this again. It does require all of this. But you as an attendee at this conference looking for self-care systems and strategies, this is where that comes in. So there's more to it, but we are in this individual space. I hope that makes sense. And I hope you're doing okay over there. I know this is like this can be a little heavy. But let's move into my favorite protective factor. I think one of the most important protective factors is the role of social support. Social support is a mitigating factor of burnout. Social support is a massive protective factor when it comes to like anxiety, self-esteem, self-efficacy, growth. When we have social support in the workplace, we are better off. People are usually more loyal to each other, which makes sense, right? But social support is really what's up. Having social support, again, we need to look at this from a multiple level standpoint. It can't just be the workplace though, where we're experiencing social support, or where we're looking for social support. It's also making sure that we have a social support network outside of work, be it our families, our friends, our chosen families, our partners. It's a question of who can we go to when we need that extra little bit, when we need that extra little um bit of support. Um, and identifying those people and then communicating with those people of like, I see you as a very important person in my life, and I hope that we can be supportive for each other. I see a question came through. Should I answer it?
Yeah, so the question was, I'm running the creamery by myself. Are there things I can do to take the place of leaning on colleagues or passing things off to them when my plate has too much on it?
Interesting. So you run the creamery by yourself. I think that stuff with like when it kind of, okay, hold on. It kind of depends on the kind of support you're looking for. If we're looking at like delegation, like organizational delegation of what's the word I'm looking for? Tasks that have to be done, that's a more structural issue. But if we're looking at support of like, I have an overwhelming workload and my emotional regulation is a little bit off and I need support in that way. We don't always want to sometimes we want to be able to lean on our colleagues, sometimes we don't. Something that I advise a lot of leaders within the food industry, especially people who are I'll describe it as a little bit lonely at the top of their organization, is to create a peer mentorship network. In the Healthy Pour Institute, which we'll link to at the end, we are building, weekly leadership check-ins specifically for issues like that, and creating a peer support and peer mentorship network of people who you can go to, who understand what your stresses are on a day-to-day basis, can be very, very helpful. It's also, when you're doing something like managing or running a creamery on your own, that can be so isolating. So making it a practice to find people and then to tell them that they are those people. That's a big thing to add here, is that when we are building social support networks like those, tell people like, I view you as being part of my social support network. I know that might sound a little clinical, so you can kind of finesse that however you want, but you're someone who I want to call in those times, and I hope I can be that person for you too. And then we start to create a more like community care webbing, which I hope that answered your question, and I hope that that's helpful. But these social support bits can be the difference between like taking steps forward and sort of getting stuck in the challenging bits. Sometimes, so it's funny that you asked that question, because sometimes our social support, a peer support network would be amazing. Yeah, peer support networks are just like really helpful. And I want to caution with peer support networks that we're not looking to like therapize each other. It's not that. It's just more just like somewhere where you can be seen and validated in your feelings or your frustrations, where people can share like, I'm experiencing that too. This is how I'm trying to work through it. Like it's not taking on the problems of everybody, but more supporting each other more supporting each other through it. So so I want to caution something that happens in food and drinks and like this sector of the industry quite a lot is that people will sort of like absorb the problem of others. For peer support systems to really work, it needs to be like a reciprocal and even exchange amongst its members. So that means if people come to you and ask for help, it requires also a bit of vulnerability from your end too. It's not that you want to be constantly absorbing everyone else's stuff and call that peer support. It's a reciprocal thing. It's an even exchange. Otherwise, we are therapizing each other. And I would recommend not do, as a therapist, I would recommend not trying to do that. So look at it as a reciprocal, that you're creating bonds, that you're creating connections with each other, like stronger and stronger connections every time you reach out to each other. Even like if there's someone who you know and and you know that you're both like sort of isolated in your worlds, or maybe there's three of you, putting yourselves in like a group chat even and just like connecting is so helpful. I'll use the example of when I started my organization, Healthy Pour. I started this back in like technically 2016, technically 2018. Depends on how we define the beginning of something, but it's so isolating. It was so isolating. I would talk about this stuff and people would look at me like I had six heads, and I felt so alone. And even now, sometimes, even though there's quite a few organizations doing this work, it can still be quite isolating, you know, because I'm at the top of my organization. I have a few folks that I manage, and let's loose. They're independent contractors and whatever. But I have a group chat on my phone with Hasela Villas from Not 9 to 5 and Jessica Pomerantz and Lauren Paler and Alex. And there's all of these people who we are in similar spaces in our careers that we are relying on each other and leaning on each other just to feel seen. And that really, really, really does go a long way. And someone said, WhatsApp group chats. That's what's up. That's what's up. Okay. So, stress. When we think about stress gets a really bad rep because we know that stress can be very toxic. But we see all of these things on the internet and stuff that's like how to banish stress, get rid of your stress. You don't want to be stressed. We don't want stress. That's not true. We do want stress. Stress is good for us. Stress helps us to grow. When we experience stress, it's because our bodies and minds are recognizing that we don't have the skills to manage a situation that's in front of us. So it's a signal. If we aren't tending to that signal, that's when stress starts to become toxic. So the stress itself is not supposed to be lasting days and days and days. If it's becoming chronic and it's lasting forever, and it's just like the same episode of stress over and over and over again that we're not really able to tend to, it means we're not tending to it. But if we tend to it, that's when growth happens. I have a lovely little, I'm going to skip this slide. We'll talk about burnout in a second. But this chart is really wonderful in illustrating intensity and duration of stress versus resources that we have. So when we don't have the resources, the protective factors to cope with our stress, that's when it starts to really wear on us. That's when it becomes toxic, unhealthy, and it starts to really compromise our well-being. So if we have this like high intensity or duration of stress and we don't have a ton of these resources, these protective factors, that's when it's going to start getting really gnarly. But if we have resources like social support, emotional intelligence, adaptive coping skills, those kinds of things, if we have a workplace that supports innovation and task conflict and all of those things, then our stress becomes positive, adaptive, innovative, and growth oriented. That's when we start to, I think someone called, what is it called? The flow state. When you're in a sort of state of like imagine when you're in a state of a stressful situation, like you're playing a video game and you're just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. you have these other sort of like resources available to you. You know that you are one, just playing a game. You know that you're in a state of joy. You know that you're also like releasing and you're able to cope with that situation. That's a very different stress situation than when you're, I hope you all can't hear that horn. And if you can, I'm sorry. Okay, it's gone now. Those are very different stress situations that require different resources to cope with. But we can find joy in our stress if we have those resources in place. And those are our protective factors. Burnout is a conservation of resources. When we become burnout, there's three stages. We become cynical, we start to withdraw, and then we become ineffective at work because we're conserving the resources that we have. We still have to have some resource, like emotional resources available to us so that we can keep surviving. So what happens is our brain kind of shuts down and we come to this like low level resource conservation. And so then everything becomes toxic and unhealthy and compromises our well-being. Going back to understanding what burnout is not about being stressed all the time. It's about what we call socio-emotional stress. And that is stress in relation to the group, the social group that we're a part of. So burnout comes in when we're working and working and working and working and working, but we don't feel appreciated. One reason that I find in food service becomes so burned out is what I referenced earlier when it comes to you have these hundreds and thousands of years of experience on a cheese wall at the grocery store, but people just walk up and start like pressing it. And it just starts to kind of go, oh man, like I'm just going to squeeze this cheese. Could you not? It's or we feel invisible or devalued. That's when burnout starts to come into play. So it's not necessarily about the hours worked. Sometimes there is an element of workload to it, but it's usually like I have so much workload that I'm feeling undervalued because I'm being asked to do this workload. Like I am a full human being, not just a worker. So keep that in mind with burnout. That it's not necessarily about time, but how we feel within the context of the social group of what we're putting out. So the window of tolerance. I'm sure we've all seen Gordon Ramsay, my nemesis. I don't think he knows that he's my nemesis, but he's definitely my nemesis. Hopping off on people and yelling at people. Oh, here's Cardigan. Here's my foster dog. Hi, baby girl. So window of tolerance, when we hit this threshold of hyper arousal, that's when we start to lose our, this is Cardigan. She's available for adoption. If anybody wants her, she's lovely. I love her. But hyperarousal is when we sort of start to lose that regulation, when we get so stressed that someone says anything to us and we just snap. Hypoarousal is when we are so stressed that we kind of shut down, and that we're not able to be effective at all. What we want is this middle space of stress where we're able to manage, we're able to feel a little bit challenged, a little bit excited, and we can move effectively through that. What starts to happen when we experience burnout and chronic stress is that window of tolerance really starts to close. So making sure that we're able to cope effectively, I think the next slide is coping. It is. When we're able to cope effectively with these things, then we're able to open that window of tolerance a little bit. With coping, there's two main kinds of coping that we see. We experience stress, and no matter what, our brain and body, could you guys not? So I have my foster dog and I have my resident dog, and they're laying together and they're biting each other's neck. It's fine. Wow. Okay. Wow. Chaos at my feet. Wow. Sorry. So coping, absolute madness. So there's two main kinds of coping. No matter what, our brains and bodies are going to find ways to cope because it's how we work. It's how we do. First way is called adaptive coping. Adaptive coping is when we learn from a stressful situation, we're able to identify where the stress is coming from, and we can repair it. So for example, I'm in a situation right now where I'm giving a presentation and my dogs are at my feet and it's a little bit stressful. A great way to adaptively cope with this would be, one, to acknowledge that it's happening and just kind of embrace it and just say, this is a situation. Another, been there, done that with the dogs. Yep. Another way to adaptively cope would be to pause the presentation and put them in the crate. Or it would be to maybe take a step and like take a breath and like take some deep breaths. That could be a thing that I'm able to start moving through the situation, acknowledging the situation, and then addressing it. Maladaptively coping would be if I were to not acknowledge it at all. I would maybe just like bite my tongue and just push through. And my energy in my body would probably start to go up and I would feel more stressed and it would start to bubble. Maladaptive coping also requires us to sometimes like numb out. So that's when we start to see, this is crazy. It's fine. Everything's fine. When we don't address the things and our energy starts to rise and it starts to bubble within us, we find ways to numb that stress response. And that's when we start to see things like substance use issues. We start to see us vegging out in front of the TV, dissociating, doom scrolling Instagram, anything to sort of distract ourselves from the feelings that we're actually trying to not feel. So when we think about coping, trying to get back on track after that madness, when we think about coping and how we cope, it's important to ask ourselves, am I leaning into the stressor? Am I addressing what's causing the stress, or am I numbing out? And there's nothing really wrong with like numbing out those situations. It's more that we don't want to always be numbing out, because then that stress inside of us is always growing. So our ability to address the fact that, one, I'm feeling stressed, excuse me, why I'm feeling stressed, where I'm coming from, and how can I problem solve this, is going to help us build those protective factors. It also helps us to move in and out of stress in a way that doesn't feel so debilitating. All right. So I want to come back to, and I'm going to open up for questions in a second, but when we look at protective factors, they're organizational, individual, and cultural. So when you are building these individual protective factors, I want to note that that feeds into the cultural aspect of what's happening within your organization. So the more we normalize a regulated emotional system, healthy coping, clear communication when we're having these problems, the more likely we're going to see them become institutionalized and embedded in our organization. So while these protective factors and that resiliency do require us to have all of these things in place, if we can't change the organization from a systemic standpoint, we can change it from a cultural standpoint. And that's each person kind of doing their part and playing a role in that. So practical ways to manage our well-being is dealing with our stress and addressing our stress when we can. If we can't address our stress in the moment, like after this is done in 9 minutes, I'm probably going to go outside. I'm going to drink a big glass of water. I'm going to let the dogs run around, and we are going to release the energy that's happening in the house right now. So we can't do that right now because I'm here, but I can do that in 10 minutes. If we don't allow ourselves that space, it does start to bubble in there. Processing our emotions when we can. That looks like therapy, journaling. My therapist is asking me to meditate, and I know that it works, but I'm also like, ugh, meditation really works. Exercise, stress builds as energy in our body. So finding ways to get that stress out, even if it means just shaking our hands, or like sometimes I'll wash my hands and then shake it off, and it just helps to feel so much better. Our breath work is really, really helpful. But so much of this has to do with nervous system regulation, managing our stress, identifying how we're feeling. The worksheets that are available to you. One of them in particular is an emotional processing worksheet. And it helps to build emotional intelligence by it's built out kind of like a tasting grid from high energy to low energy and desirable and not desirable feelings. And it also asks you questions of like, where do you feel it in your body? And then a series of questions to help you process what it is that you're feeling. There's also other like life satisfaction bits that you can start looking at your well-being on a more holistic and social level, with a bunch of processing opportunities there too. Yeah, the worksheets are available in Shed. Beautiful. There's also a ton of worksheets like Claire wrote in the healthypour.org/worksheets. So many worksheets are available there about identity and things like that. I really encourage you to look at that to sort of build, and those are designed specifically to build those individual protective factors for you. And with that, what questions do you have? How are you doing? I know that's a lot, but I think it's also important to it's really important to recognize that when we look at systems of well-being, none of these things are a one-size-fits-all thing. So I can tell you things like drink more water. I mean, we know to drink more water, get more sleep, but sometimes it's important to understand that the systems that are happening within us so we can develop our own self-care practices.
So we do have a question. Any suggestions on how to share with my management that I'm feeling underappreciated? I worry that if I bring it up, my management will respond in a way that reinforces my perspective isn't valuable to them.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. I would, if you don't feel comfortable being like, I don't feel appreciated, like coming right out and say that, I would ask for a meeting about growth opportunities and development opportunities and what those look like. And then within the context of that conversation, start kind of poking at, I'm wanting to learn, I'm wanting to grow, I'm interested in these things, and I want to know that my organization also wants me to learn and grow and stay here. So it feels a little, it sucks that we have to kind of approach it like that, but if you go in from a development standpoint, that can be really helpful, so it doesn't feel like you don't appreciate me, which makes people defensive. That appreciation bit is so important, especially when we look at systems of burnout. Not feeling like we're appreciated is like burnout city, in such a big way. But if you go in, and I'll say this again, if you go in as a conversation of like, I'm hoping to be developed, what can I do to improve? I feel like I'm doing a lot, and I want to make sure that we are in alignment, that I'm performing in this kind of way. You might learn a ton, but also it opens a dialogue of feedback. I do worry about places that don't accept systems of feedback. And I also recognize that a lot of places don't, and it can be very, very hard. And I have deep empathy for you in that situation, but I would frame it as a growth opportunity if you can. I hope that's helpful.
And there's a question from the chat too, about when to schedule in time to decompress. Would you schedule time within your day, or go with the flow, or do them at the end?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think not quite what you asked, but the more we can go in prepared, the better. If you can find time throughout your day to like have a moment of decompression, I would do that so that you're not bubbling up over the 6, 8, 10 hours that you're working. I would also find ways after your work day to intentionally decompress. Sometimes we're like, okay, I'm just going to go home and I'm going to make dinner and I'm going to clean my house and I'm going to hang out with my dog, or I'm going to hang out with my partner or whatever. But we don't actually schedule that time. that post workday time. Like we also like recommend scheduling time for worrying, for example. But if you can go into the shift fresh and ready, go into your workday fresh and ready, like that sort of like mise en place vibe, then I think that helps to manage the decompression throughout the workday. But yeah, if I were you, I would play with what works. You know, I would try something one day and try it the next. I would communicate with your colleagues that you're like, I'm trying to figure out when's best to decompress. Can we all work together on this? Make it a group activity, you know, take turns, hold each other accountable to it, like allow space for it. Make it a game and celebrate it. Try those things and play along with that.
Another question we have is, how do you know when this can be solved by just trying to move things around at work? And when should I think about seeing a therapist or getting some other help?
Oh my, if you look at the worksheet, this is a very simple answer to a complex question, so take it for what it is. If you look at the worksheets that are available attached to this session, there's the one that you can see like how satisfied am I in my life, in my work, and in my family. If you're seeing a dissatisfaction in areas outside of work, that's definitely a key indicator that I would be like, maybe there's someone to help you deal. I do think that any kind of therapy or coaching is going to be helpful to help manage how we deal with the even normal stresses of life. I do think it's valuable. So yeah, if you feel like, I mean, we call it, not to get a little like that, but we call it clinically significant. If you feel like what you're experiencing is affecting your ability to work or your ability to have healthy relationships or your ability to grow, that's when I would just call in some professional help, even if it's just for a few sessions. It doesn't have to be this lifelong Freudian commitment, just someone to help you manage and maybe come up with some skills in the short term that are going to work for you, and at least to try. I hope that answers the question. It's a tough one.
Laura, thank you so much. Oh, I have to reshare my video so you can all see my gorgeous face. Um, Laura, thank you. That was fantastic. And thank you to Jamie for fielding our questions. So a reminder that the worksheets that Laura shared are in the session details page on Sked. And we are going to take a break, and we will reconvene at 5 o'clock Eastern time for happy hour. We are going on a journey. We will be touring Brazil's Bela Fazenda. So put a plate of snacks together, pour yourself a tasty beverage, perhaps a healthy pour, and and we'll see you in an hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.